Alright, thanks everyone for coming. We're going to go ahead and get started since the candidates have very busy schedules. I'm Amrit, I'm the editor of the Chronicle. Thanks again for coming. This is the DSG Presidential Debate hosted by us. And Gautam and I are moderating, so he's going to explain how it's going to work.
All right, great. I'm Gautam. I'll be moderating with Amrit. Just to explain the rules, we're going to have opening statements, 60 seconds each. Then we're going to have a series of open questions directed to all the candidates. They'll each have 60 seconds to respond. If another candidate is mentioned during a response, that candidate will have an additional 30 seconds to respond. We'll then have a set of questions that are either directed towards one or two of the candidates. That candidate, or those candidates, will have 60 seconds to respond. Once again, 30 seconds if someone's name is mentioned. Then we'll have a lightning round, so 10 seconds each, quick questions. And then finally, closing statements, 60 seconds each. All right, let's get started.
Alright, let's start with opening statements from left to right.
Great. Hi guys, my name is Tara and I've been your Vice President of Academic Affairs. I think a huge part of being president, right, is recognizing that there are problems on campus, but being able to come up with creative and innovative solutions to actually solve them. And so I think I've done that to some capacity already. We always talk about how independents don't have community on campus, so I created an independent house called the Living Learning Community, which is a brand new housing option about intellectual social community. Another thing that we do is we realize that Duke has become increasingly stratified based on identity lines, and so I worked to integrate a new program called Duke 101 to the curriculum that's about diversity and cultural competency that every first year is going to take. So I think that a big part, again, of being president is being able to do this on a broader scale. And so some of the things that I'd love to do is promote equity and inclusivity, of course try to have a more enriching, vibrant social culture on campus, expand pass-fail, among a lot of other things that I'm sure I'm going to talk about in this debate. But I think it's about having a candidate that has a dynamic, values-based vision, but actually has the experiences to turn that into concrete policy goals. And hopefully, over the next couple of days and over the next 40 minutes, I'll be able to prove to you that that candidate is me.
Hi guys, my name is John Guarco. I serve as the current Executive Vice President of Student Government, and I'm running for DSG President. Some of you may know me as an event coordinator for the Catholic Center. Some of you may know me as a friend on campus. Some of you may even see my posters on East and West. And I'm fairly certain that a few of you may have seen a few yik-yaks about me, for better or worse. At any rate, in my role as Executive Vice President, I've accomplished a great deal that I'm very proud of. I think that is an exemplary set of vision of what I want to do if elected as DSG President. I'm responsible for the implementation of the amnesty policy, which ensures that any victim of sexual assault does not have drug or alcohol use counted against them. I'm responsible for managing and leading the Senate every Wednesday night, where I lead the 60-member Senate each and every Wednesday. I'm responsible for working with several administrators and high-level faculty in order to ensure that what students want on campus gets done. And I'm here to ask you for your vote. I'm from Staten Island, New York. I'm a political science major minoring in economics and Russian, and I hope to earn your vote during this debate in the days to come.
Hey guys, I'm Annie Adair. I'm the current DSG Chief of Staff, so what I do is I serve at the hand of President Kezra, and so something that the whole tagline of my campaign has been to redefine what DSG can do for you. And I think what Kezra has done this year is she's been an incredible leader in terms of making sure that we're doing what the students want, and I think that's what's most important to me, is using that momentum and carrying it on as far as we can. You know, it's great to have a lot of different projects and to have that kind of checklist mindset that I think that a lot of the vice presidents have. But something that being chief of staff has allowed me to do is see the entire organization and look at all, and by working with the cabinet, I've seen a lot of different aspects of campus. And I think what's most important is that you have a DSG president who not only has, you know, a checklist of things that they want to do as president, but also a greater vision for how we can work cohesively across groups, make much more transparent avenues between students and the administration, and also making it feel like campus is less polarizing, especially in terms of social life on campus. You know, as an independent student, as a transfer, I really feel like I'm prepared to best, you know, present the interests of the student body.
All right, so we'll now move on to open questions. We will give each of you 60 seconds for the question. We'll start with John on the first one. I'm going to read the question. Sure.
So turnout was below 30% in the last presidential elections, and we actually didn't get any questions from students despite posting the All Duke page and asking for questions. So why do you think many students see DSG as not relevant to them, and what can you do to change that?
I think that many students see DSG as not relevant to them because of the lack of transparency that we have and that we've seen during this past year. If you look at our Duke Student Government website page, www.dukestudentgovernment.com, it has been changed or revised in over a year. Our Duke Student Government Facebook page doesn't communicate, I think, as effectively as it could be with the student body. And I think that senators need to be held more accountable when they're elected and when they're at large in communicating the needs that students face and students have towards their elected representatives and the representatives who serve in the Senate. And I think that this is something I'm particularly capable of changing, something I intend on doing when I'm elected president, by ensuring that there's a dissemination of information with regards to what we do in DSG, what the students want, and how we can bridge the gap between the veil of ignorance that lies between them and how. And I think that I'm the best person to do just that.
All right, Annie, if you want to respond next.
Yeah. So I think the kind of confounding variable is why we had such a minuscule turnout was that, one, we did change the way that we did voting. I think that's kind of aside from the fact. I think that, again, it's that people don't feel like DSG is relevant to them. They don't see, they're not connected to their senator. You know, our senators don't really represent the Duke student body as well as they could. Just in terms of like its demographics, you know, our demographics don't match up with Duke's demographics in terms of like tons of merit scholars, there's tons of great people on the Senate, and I think that we need to be more representative and we need to kind of target different groups instead of just sending out like, you know, we send out blanket emails, we hope that, you know, kids will run for Senate, but you know, you're going to get a lot of public policy kids, you're going to get a lot of political science kids who may already be involved in those types of things. So I think as long as we target much closer, you know, student groups, student leaders, and so that either by the time that they're older and in the exec boards of their organization, then suddenly like they're aware of the DSG bureaucracy, and you know, so that we can begin to kind of understand other student groups better than I think that we already do.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of a few factors, right? First, I think is that there's this apathy around campus revolving around DSG because students don't realize what projects DSG is working on. But I can tell you that, for example, students that were touched by the Living Learning Community or the New York Times program have a good impression of DSG, right? So I think that a big part of that is working on projects that students actually care about. Secondly, communicating that more effectively, right? Whether that's communicating with student leaders instead of the student body at large to get our message out there through newsletters or maybe the president going to more executive board meetings. I think that those are ways to like strengthen communication. But third, I think that we need to just change the rhetoric around DSG, right? I don't think that we need to talk about DSG as if we're not an effective body because I don't think that's true, right? I think that senators know that we're working on cool things. It's just about getting the word out more. And changing the campus culture, right? Like, the fact is not a lot of students wanted to come to the debate because they don't think DSG is relevant to them, so showing them how their projects are impacting their life through better projects. If we want to talk about like the website or the Facebook page and how this hasn't been effective, I think that those are things that are the responsibility of internal politicians in DSG, like the Chief of Staff and AVP. If those haven't been fixed last year, I don't see how they would be fixed by the same people next year.
I was mentioning, am I allowed to respond?
Yeah.
Sure. So the original question dealt with voter turnout. This past semester, I led an effort to revitalize and change the way that we do voting here at Duke. I worked with several senators in this room to do just that. And come the April senatorial elections, we will see the results of the changes that I made, which ensures that when you vote for an elected official, you do not have to rank each and every candidate, which I think will lead to a higher turnout. Another change that I've instigated this past semester includes changing the time frame of elections themselves. Instead of it being from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., elections are now held from noon to noon on one day. We've seen the results of this in the past young trustee election, with an increase of 1,000 voters in that past election. I think the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, so I think that the really key thing that we have to understand here is that, again, like, it isn't just about Facebook or it isn't just about the Chronicle, that we really do need to be doing meaningful projects to people. And something that happened this past year was we hosted all the House Council presidents and, you know, asked them, you know, asked them about our projects and what they think of them. And I think there were still some vice presidents who failed to do exactly that, and that we really do need to listen to students and we need to find avenues that make it as easy as possible for students to get involved. Sorry, is that enough?
Yeah. All right, so on the next question, once again for all of you, so can you name one experience and describe one experience, be specific please, that has made you most ready to be DSG president? We'll start with Annie.
So something that I worked on this past year with Kazra, the president, was we worked on instituting the C5. So that's something where we saw a response, we talked to the right administration, and we got it in action. So over the summer, they cut the C2 route from central to east. I was the only member of Exec to be who lives on Central. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be affected by that change. So what we went ahead and did, so Kaiser got in contact with Carl Pinto, the director of parking and transportation, and then she came back to me and said, okay, we need a bunch of proposals. I wrote up quite a few proposals of what different bus routes could look like, and then we went ahead and we had a discussion with them. I proposed C5 among others, and they kind of went with that one. So that's just something, and then days later it was implemented, and we were in charge of communicating that to the student body and making sure that we did outreach and got it out. And I think the word got out as best as it can. Obviously there were still flaws in the system, especially with parking and transportation, but I think that was definitely a big first initial step, and I think that kind of speaks to the type of leader of taking a problem, seeing it, and acting on it as fast as possible.
Great. Tara?
Yeah, so the experience that I'll talk about is actually maybe a little bit wider, which is the experience of being the only candidate that sat on the Board of Trustees. And so I regularly work with the highest administrators at Duke on strategic policy at this university. And I think that through this experience, not only having a greater vision at how Duke should move forward, but also I think building relationships that are really important. So one, for example, is being in the room where we're discussing things about DKU's future and how Duke is going to move into being more of a global university. And then that filters down into doing things like creating a focus group for the provost to actually talk to students that have gone to DKU and shaping the way that Duke students are going to be able to go there. Obviously that relationship then translates into other concrete policies that I've been able to work on. So for example, trying to create text comments on ACES, which is something that I lobbied for to the provost's office, and we're now going through approval stages, or looking at building a new reorientation program for juniors, which is something that the provost's office is hoping to fund. So having that relationship from the Board of Trustees and using and leveraging that relationship to be effective and persuasive in other policies is something the president needs to have.
Thank you. John?
In 2014, several women's groups like We Are Here Duke and Duke Support created a list of proposals that they wanted to see implemented by the university. At the top of these priorities is what I mentioned before, the amnesty policy. The amnesty policy, and I reiterate, ensures that any student who has been sexually assaulted does not have drug or alcohol usage prior to being sexually assaulted used against them. In the implementation of the amnesty policy, I've worked with several women's groups leaders on campus to get this done. And I've also worked with Title IX Director Howard Callum, Dean Stephen Bryan, and several other high-level administrators in order to ensure that this policy actually happened. A common criticism of DSG this past year has been that we are only a programming body. We don't actually change policy. Well, I have, and I intend doing so as your DSG president. And I have 15 seconds left. On the point of being the only candidate on the Board of Trustees, let me clarify that point. Only vice presidents and the DSG president himself are appointed to the Board of Trustees. I, Executive Vice President, and the Chief of Staff is not. So it was beyond circumstances of our control, and I think that my time's up.
Thanks.
So after a series of racist and homophobic incidents on campus, portions of the undergraduate student body expressed that they feel pain and fearful on campus in the current environment. Some students made demands for changes to policy and campus comment in response. So DSG has expressed support for changes on campus, but seems to have actually done little to actively solve issues with the campus climate. Why doesn't it seem to many students like DSG has done more? And if elected president, what could you do to make students actually feel safer and more inclusive?
Or John?
I remember hearing criticism from several student leaders this past semester when it came to racial incidents that came on campus. It was this: the DSG as a whole is more of a reactive body instead of a proactive body. Instead of taking action before events happen in order to mitigate the threat of racial incidents on campus, we only react to them with resolutions and new programs and new groups. While this is important, and there have been several positive efforts made by members of DSG like Vice President Ron Wiseman to mitigate the threat of racial tensions on campus, I think that more can be done. And I intend to do more if elected. That involves increasing diversity of our faculty. It involves ensuring that DSG is more representative of our student demographics by reaching out to cultural and religious groups to encourage freshmen to run. It involves creating a more open and transparent DSG so students actually know what we're doing. Because like Tara mentioned before, we do a lot. It's a matter of ensuring that they know what we do, especially when it comes to matters of racial inequities on campus.
Thanks. Tara?
Yeah, so I think what's actually unique about DSG's role is that we have the opportunity to actually shape, I think, the conversations that are having on the high level and the themes around those conversations. So one of the things that you mentioned, right, is racism and homophobia, but I think that what we need to do through DSG is talk more about intersectionality, right, on an administrative level. So I think administrators don't respond to these issues proactively because they don't know what these issues are going to be, because we don't don't have the vocabulary to talk about them. So I think that the thing that DSG needs to do most, and as president we need to do, is sort of heighten conversations about what intersectionality means and how students are responding to that on campus in different social groups and stratifications. Now, on a lower level, in terms of working with students as opposed to just administrators, I think, of course, giving smaller groups more of a political voice, so having them in the room more often, and then trying to nuance the conversation. So faculty diversity is a great thing and a great buzzword to say, but we also know that admin is actually working really hard on faculty diversity. We need to come up with more creative solutions, like, for example, hiring more associate professors, getting more PhDs to teach classes, or trying to expand departments that have more diverse faculty members inherent within them.
Thank you. And Annie?
Yeah. So I think one of the big problems also is that DSG has had a tendency this past year to want to, like, when these events happen, is we react by passing very vanilla legislation that doesn't have much bite to it. And especially because I think there's a lot of self-protection from DSG senators. People wanted secret ballots when we were trying to pass a piece of legislation this past fall. They wanted to, they didn't want to get up because they didn't want to have a dissenting opinion. People don't want DSG to be videotaped because they don't know what it could mean for them later in life, which I just think is kind of egregious. And I think that we need to be responsible to our constituents, and I think we can do this by, opening up, making sure that the Senate is very open, making sure that we use public forum, maybe having themes for public forum and inviting people to come speak. Another thing would be, instead of, we had those talks with Broadhead in the fall, but I think having monthly chats like that in smaller settings like this, or even smaller, we can meet with not just President Broadhead, but other administrators, and invite students from all corners of campus to come and talk to these people, so we have really transparent channels for communication so that we can fix these problems before they occur.
Thanks. All right, so on to the next question. So how would your background help you to represent the diversity of undergraduates if elected president? Tara, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think this comes back to a really fundamental question, which is the issue of how intersectionality is sort of represented on an administrative level. Any issue that we talk about, for example, sexual assault, which is a huge thing that the administration is working on, right, can be nuanced by the idea of intersectionality, right? Sexual assault is different for queer women versus, black women versus women in sororities, et cetera. And so obviously I think being someone who is represented by an intersectional community, that's important. Secondly, I think being part of a smaller minority religious and cultural group and understanding that those groups tend to not have as much of a political voice on campus, especially when there's such a really complex racial and political background on this university, right? So finding ways for groups that don't always have a political voice to have a bigger voice. And so one of the things I've always thought about is how the Hindu Center is in the basement of the chapel, right? Understanding that there are these small groups who don't even know how to lobby for a renovated space or for, a meeting with Broadhead, working with those groups, which I think is represented by my gender and my race.
Thank you. John?
I believe that I have an intrinsic understanding of what diversity means on campus. I'm Colombian, Italian, Filipino, and Greek. I identify as multiracial. I think that I have an inherent understanding of exactly what diversity means on campus. Tara mentioned that the Hindu Center below the chapel is in a place where it is because the result of students not being able to understand how to lobby for certain changes they want seen. The Mihenta Center is located in between two bathrooms on the basement of the Bryant Center. My goal as DSG president is not only to serve as a voice for students, but also to amplify their voices to the administration. Part of my plans and platforms includes ensuring that student leaders are not only heard, but are brought to the table when it comes to meetings with high-level administrators. I think that there is no one better to speak on behalf of students than students themselves, and I intend on doing just that if elected and if I earn your vote as DSG president.
Thank you. And Annie?
Yeah. So as chief of staff, I have a very internal role, and I'm not given all of these positions on, various committees around campus. I'm not on the board of trustees, so it's forced me to get creative. And I've gotten involved not only with the cabinet, who oversee a large number of different aspects. So I've gotten involved with religious life, with arts on campus, with Greek life, and there'd be BDU representatives. We have all different types of people on cabinet. So learning more about them and their issue areas has, definitely expanded my viewpoint. But not only that, and aside from that, I'm on the curriculum committee for the University Curriculum Committee. I was one of 3 women appointed to the ISC Sexual Assault Prevention Task Force. But inherently so, I'm an independent student. I'm the only one up here that represents 60% of the student body, and I think that's really important. And then also, I was a transfer student. I have this different perspective from most of Duke, and I'd say that can really help shape seeing a bunch of different options and not just seeing it from an unaffiliated viewpoint or not just from a specific viewpoint, so I think we can see everybody.
Thank you.
So all of you have lots of ideas on your campaign websites, but DSG presidential candidates in the past haven't always been able to implement all of their ideas when elected. So we really want to hear about your priorities. If you had to choose one item from your platform to implement and had to drop everything else, which one would it be?
Annie, we'll start with you.
This is hard. There's so many things that I think are really important, but I think one of the most important things is helping people learn helping groups learn how to use SOSC funding and encouraging much clearer and fair enforcement for organizations so that we can have more open events on campus and people can feel really included. Especially now with the West Union opening in the fall, it's really going to redefine Duke's campus. It's going to really change the way that Duke students interact, and I think it's really important that we work with groups and we work with the Student Organization Finance Committee to ensure that there's fair enforcement if you throw an open party, that certain groups aren't being disadvantaged just because of what they're requesting, and that SOFC really works to fully fund organizations instead of underfunding them, which I think is what they're doing right now. And I know that there's definitely restrictions within budgets, but I think using our surplus with that and really promoting that sort of so that all people from all corners of campus life can come together and not feel so polarized.
All right, thank you. Tara?
Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about, I think, is something that doesn't get a lot of attention actually on an administrative level, which is more about creating a vibrant and inclusive social culture. And so I think a big thing that we keep seeing, again, as I mentioned earlier, is a lot of stratification in Duke due to identity lines, so whether you're affiliated, unaffiliated, and then of course that happens based on socioeconomic status, on gender, on race. And I think that having an inclusive social culture includes a few things, right? I think it includes creating a safer party atmosphere so that women women and men aren't at risk for sexual assault as much. I think it's about creating something that is more socioeconomically feasible, so people don't have to pay $1,000 a semester to be able to go to parties on this campus, right? Empowering groups that are maybe heritage groups, cultural groups, to have events, or encouraging Greek life and SLG life to throw more inclusive parties on campus, I think is sort of a big one. And I think thirdly, as housing continues moving towards a more progressive model, making sure that independent students feel like they have community on campus that isn't just social, but also intellectual or cultural, and so building up those communities through programs like the Living Learning Community.
Thanks. And John?
Student conduct would be a top priority if I was elected and I had to drop everything else. I think student conduct is an important issue to deal with because I think it's connected to several other main issues on campus, including sexual assault, diversity, and inclusivity. Over the past decade, student conduct cases here at Duke have doubled. And I think that this is indicative of a system that does not have fairness and justice predicated in the system as a whole. When it comes to the issue of student conduct, I think that it's fundamentally wrong that if you seek to appeal a sanction, for example, underage drinking or smoking marijuana, things that I'm sure Duke students never do, I think that what's important is that they are able to have a fair and clear trial when it comes to student conduct. Now, if you want to appeal a sanction, you have to see new evidence introduced. When it comes to student conduct and inclusivity on campus, I think it's important that we move towards an alcohol policy similar to what Washington University has or what Stanford has, where responsible drinking is encouraged with residential assistant oversight.
Thank you. And Annie? Oh, you already went, sorry. All right, so next question. So for the past several years, DSG candidates have promised to fix the independent housing model and have proposed various ideas to do so, but there are still significant issues. So do you think the housing model needs changing? And if so, what will you do to fix it? So Tara, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think that the problem with independent life currently is that it's literally a random assortment of people, right? That's how the lottery system works, and I don't think you're ever going to be able to form a really strong community bond when you have a random lottery of people together. That's why I think that we need to introduce ways for independent community to have community through alternative means or themes, right? So the Living Learning Community, the first house is political science and political theory themes, right? And then we found, I mean, like 50 or 60 people that really wanted to be a part of this house. And so bringing people together based on some sort of theme, I think is a lot more effective and makes people excited, right? And I think is opportunities for faculty-student collaboration, for students to actually impact the community that they live in as opposed to the current independent house model. So I love to continue moving in that direction of continuing to theme these houses, but not having dues, not having recruitment. It continues to be a lottery process which is fair and inclusive to everyone, but brings people together based on interests, which I think is actually going to form more communities that, again, are open and inclusive. The last thing I think we need to do is with houses that currently exist under affiliated models is ask them to sort of make their events open to the public.
All right, thank you. And John?
So 60% of our student body is composed of independent students. When there's a problem with a residential housing system with regards to independent students, it's a problem that affects the majority of Duke students. I think that one particular initiative that's tangible that I would definitely work on if elected, and note that our housing model will be examined next year once again, is increasing the amount of people who are able to block together for an independent house. I think that with a maximum of 6 people who can only block an independent house, that limits the amount of community building that they can have when moving forward to their sophomore, junior, and senior years. I also think that we should, and this may be anathema in the presidential campaign, adopt Tara Bansal's idea of expanding living learning communities, focusing on academic interests and several other interests that binds and unites groups of students together for a common goal and a common undergraduate student experience.
Thank you. Annie?
Yeah. So I think what's really important before we start talking about this is understanding that the problem with this campus is that we have an if versus them mentality. If 60% of the student body is independent and the other part of the student body is affiliated, there's this tendency to think that like independent students, that there's this like, to socialize on campus that you have to, live with people that you socialize with. And I think that's false. I think that you can find community outside of your house. You don't necessarily have to focus so much energy on making sure that houses are perfect, and you can also make sure that campus programs are perfect. And working with that to make campus more open is more important to me than trying to like continue to just like, giving RAs money to throw pizza parties is great, but unless RAs are saying like, hey, the more money you throw at me, the more people are coming, then we should focus less on thinking that like the only way to build community on campus is within independent houses. It's not just about houses, it's about the entire community. And I want people to start understanding that and it's not that if versus them mentality. We should all be together on campus outside of our houses.
Great. And next question.
So what could you actually do as president to address the issues of sexual harassment and sexual assault on campus? And what role do you think DSG can or actually should play in addressing this issue?
All right, we'll start with John.
I think before answering that question, it's important to know what I've already done. I'm the only candidate here standing who has served on the University Sexual Misconduct Task Force, created and formed by President Richard Broadhead, where I've worked with several high-level administrators like Dr. Larry Mineta, Dean Stephen Bryan, and Dean Victoria Krebs. I also serve on a secondary sexual misconduct committee with, again, Dean Victoria Krebs, Crystal George at the Women's Center, implementing a wide array of initiatives to mitigate sexual assault on campus. What I intend on doing is annualizing and continuing a program that I have created this past year on LDOC. If you see something, say something. A common criticism of LDOC has been that there's been a great deal of groping and sexual assault on that day. For the first time this year, there will be Duke University Police, a patrol car on main campus to ensure that any student who faces the threat of sexual assault has an increased security presence so that they feel safer and more secure on campus. I intend on working on initiatives like this and continuing the trend of programs and policies aimed at mitigating the threat of sexual assault and sexual harassment if elected.
Annie?
Yeah. So this past year, I served as one of 3 women on the Interfraternity Council Sexual Assault Prevention Task Force, and that really expanded my viewpoint, I think, on the entire issue. And I also recently spoke to some of the Women's Center interns, because this is an issue that I really care about. And I think it's more than just PAC training. It's more than just talking about it. It's about finding those solutions that are maybe hidden in there, hidden in the fraternity culture, hidden in the environment that we're creating on campus, and finding them and changing them. So something that we worked on in that task force was sending out a survey to try and get at the root of sexual assault. And I think that some of the things are really simple. It's like, things like champagne and shackles or whip and keys, or even, maybe working and seeing if how those shape the environment, seeing, how does a wave formal so women feel pressure a week, focusing on a week. And I think that with those types of results, we can find, really actual meaningful, make small changes that are meaningful and are going to make that much more of a difference for women on campus.
And Tara?
Yeah, so obviously the university is already working on sexual assault policy. So as president, what would I add that I think is different to the conversation? I think 2 things. One, as a woman, I think I recognize that there's too much of a focus on bystander intervention, but a lot of sexual assault happens not because the bystander wasn't there, but because people don't understand consent. So I think we should do consent chats, things like that with RAs so that we have the vocabulary to talk about consent early on. Secondly, as president, adding to the university mission to discuss sexual assault, including men. I think 1 in 3 gay men is affected by sexual assault on college campuses, and yet we have no conversation about that. So I think implementing more policies and programming for that. The second question that you asked is what should be the role of DSG president, which we haven't talked about too much. But as DSG president, I think it's not just reiterating the conversations that we've had in the past, right, but adding something that's creative and new to the conversation, because we don't need someone to reiterate the past. They have that, and that's called like memos and minutes, right? So I think that being that person, and also I think promoting that dialogue and telling students that we're like working on that issue and bringing those students into the room, particularly about these two other issues.
Great, thank you. All right, so next question. What is one decision made by the current DSG president that you disagree with? And we'll start with you.
So something that I think that we have done a poor job of has been using surplus. And I don't think that's necessarily, the DSG president it's not a DSG president only, it's the entire conversation that we have in the executive board. And what people constantly do when we put forth proposals for using surplus is they look at the flaws of it instead of looking at like, would it really benefit students on campus, and people are constantly saying that somebody else can pay for this, somebody else can pay for this. And I think it definitely is something that as DSG president, I'd really say to people, like, pin down exactly, that we're supposed to be using surplus. This is not our money, it's somebody else's money. And I think that we really need to focus on using it and not trying to like find flaws in every single plan, and really working to find actual projects that people want or actual services that people need on campus, and using that money for that instead of just kind of saying, well, somebody else can pay for that, or like Fix My Campus can do that.
All right. Tara?
Yeah, so I actually think one of the best conversations that I've had with the current president, and we've had a lot of good conversations, is specifically talking about DKU and the future of DKU. Obviously my purview has always been academic affairs, so I'd have to speak with a lot of students, administrators, faculty, again, the provost, the vice provost, on what DKU could look like, and recognizing that I think Duke has the potential to be a global university, which I think is something that can sometimes be hard to swallow. And so a lot of the conversations that we had were, what is the opportunity cost of investing in DKU, and should we expand there? And obviously having to sort of come together on whether we should push admin to expand DKU or not, or what type of advice we should give them. One of the things that we ended up doing together to sort of bridge that gap and understand where we felt on the issue, because I think we were coming from two very different places, was doing a focus group of students that have been to DKU who had actually really good experiences. And actually I think President McFly, which she can speak for herself later, ends up sort of changing her mind on whether we should expand DKU or not. And I think we're now pushing, or telling admin that students actually have had great experiences there, and they should proceed as they plan to.
John?
So first of all, I think Kate has done a great job, and if it wasn't for her choosing me to be a senator on the Equity Outreach Committee in my sophomore year, I wouldn't be standing here on the stage. Second, I'd have to agree with Annie Adair on the spending of our surplus. I think we should have had either a clear, set, defined plan proposal on how we should spend our surplus from the beginning of the year, or we should implement what Vice President Lucaci of the Services Committee has created and worked on this past semester and over the summer. What is that? A petition page. A petition page modeled after the Rochester Institute of Technology and the White House petition page, where students can directly send requests on how they want to spend their surplus, or any other myriad of other initiatives that they would like to see DSG carry out. I think this serves as a direct connection towards the student body, and something that I've worked on implementing before.
All right, so those are our open questions for all of you. We're now going to move on to individual or two-person questions. So once again, you'll have 60 seconds to respond. If you mention someone else, that person will have 30 seconds.
So Annie, your website says that you want to spend less time trying to cross projects off your checklist and more time facilitating and eliminating organization, but you also have a fair number of specific agenda items listed on your site. So can you elaborate on your proposed move away from specific projects and tell us whether that means you have actually a list of specific ideas to still implement, and how that might be difficult?
Yeah, so I think something that we need to talk about up here is that there's like this weird political pressure, I think, that we've experienced over the past couple of years of like candidates thinking that we have to, you have to do certain things, you have to check certain things just to even run a campaign. And so that was what that move was, honestly, is I felt pressure from the other people up here. Like, people are gonna pin me down and be like, you don't have any checklist, you're an ineffective candidate. But I think it is, you have to combine as president, you have to have a checklist mindset, in the back of your mind. You also have to see a creative vision for all of Duke, and I think that's something that Those are all projects that I support, that I would love to encourage vice presidents, but I think it's definitely the role of a vice president to do a lot of different projects, but it's not necessarily, it's the role of the president to see the entire organization as a whole, which is something that I'm going to prioritize. It's less so about like, I need to accomplish X, Y, Z until, when I graduate. It's more so that like, do I feel like when I graduate that I have built stronger relationships with student groups on campus and that we've built a more inclusive campus community.
All right, the next one is for Tara. You've highlighted your extensive elected experience working within DSG and on the Board of Trustees, but do you think that you'll be able to address the fact that many students see DSG as insular and inwardly focused and more focused on policy than on students?
Yeah, I'll say right off the bat that I think that narrative that's being created is unfair. I think it's a narrative that panders because students will respond to it well, because students like to, at times, right, like not like DSG because DSG is an establishment and an institution. And sometimes there are people in DSG that you don't love, like there are lots of people on campus that you don't love. But I frankly just don't believe that that's true, right? Like I think that DSG isn't insular. I think that the projects that, so many of these senators in this room have been working on are for students. I'll never get to live in the living learning community, but it's going to benefit students. And so that's why it's really cool, right? I never get to take Duke 101, but it could shape this campus and conversations that are had here, and that's what's cool about it. Senators in this room have worked on Mental Health Awareness Month. They've worked on sexual assault policies. They've worked on, just a myriad of items. And so I want to encourage DSG senators to continue working on projects that are important to them and important to their friends. And I think that what we need to work on, right, is communicating how that is impacting people. I think a lot of times, frankly, DSG doesn't take credit for work that we do. And so I think if senators want to make it clear the work that they're doing and coordinate with the Chronicle and our website to make that clear, that's great. I don't think DSG is insular, right? I think the projects we work on benefit students, and you can see that on campus.
Thank you. And the next question is for you, John. So you've campaigned a lot on your work revisiting the sexual assault policy, but many of the recent changes to the policy have actually seemed to be more like clarifications than wholesale change. So do you really think that the work you've done has actually impacted the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment on campus?
I certainly do. And I do say that because, as I mentioned before, what I did with regards to sexual misconduct policy was the #1 priority of several women's groups on campus. But of course, I think that more can be done. Because sexual misconduct policy clarification and reform is going to be at the top of my agenda if elected DSG president. Currently, I think one particular issue with regards to policy is connected to student conduct. If you are a complainant and you feel that the person who has sexually assaulted you, who was not expelled, was treated with undue leniency by student conduct, you currently cannot appeal that sanction, which means that your person who hurt you can still remain on campus. I think that's fundamentally wrong. When it comes to sexual assault and misconduct policy, I think I'm the one candidate who's best prepared to lead on the issue and create long-lasting change for Duke University.
Thank you. Next question is for John and Annie. So as far as we've seen, neither of you have received any public endorsements from student groups so far. Can you talk about that and tell us why that is? We'll start with you, John.
When it comes to the issue of public endorsements, I think that this is a really great question to deal with. And when I speak to student groups, and in spite of their endorsements of the one candidate who is not mentioned, Tara to my right, I think that I still have the best agenda when it comes to initiating student initiatives. In engineering student government, I think that I have the best plan towards disseminating allocations of funds to our student groups. They currently only get $15,000 a year to allocate to 20 different groups and societies. I think that this can be changed by reforming the SFC bylaw. When it comes to groups like Duke DIA, identity groups that have endorsed Tara, I think I'm best prepared to ensure that there's an increase in diversity when it comes to DSG, and ensuring that the commonality of demands made by several identity groups, which includes increased diversity of our faculty, comes to fruition. In spite of endorsements not coming on my way, I still think that when it comes to the issues that matter most to the student body, I'm best prepared to tackle those issues and ensure that positive change happens in our school.
All right, thank you. Annie?
I also think a lot of, when we go into these endorsements, there's a really bad tendency to pander to these organizations. And I think that, the people who are getting it, maybe you have the most projects that are the most relevant to them, but that's no promise that what you're actually going to do is, what you said. And so I think that that's key is one, is that maybe the reason that I haven't won all these organizations, it's not that I, if I don't talk as pretty or if I don't sit on X number of, committees, I think what's really important is that despite that, I think I still have the greatest vision for what the role of the DSG president can be, that it's not just checking projects off of a checklist that like is relevant to that organization. I think it's about making having a better environment for senators and like working to really support your VPs and not tear them down and not bully anybody. And so I think that's also important, but it's really hard to portray that to organizations. So I think you also need to take that into account. What kind of leader are they going to be, not just what are they going to do.
Thank you.
Since I mentioned doing extras, if we're running short on time.
Yeah, I mean, you could follow, but we are running.
Okay, we can move on.
All right.
No stress.
Next up to that. So John and Tara, both of you are members of Greek organizations. So how do you address the fact that independent students are underrepresented in these groups?
Yeah, so I think that's based on a couple of things, right? So I think that maybe first of all, like a lot of the majority of Senate is made up of first years who haven't really rushed an organization yet. So actually, especially in the fall, I think that's actually not necessarily true, but in terms of Greek representation, I think that there's a lot of Greek representation in a lot of groups on campus, and that's because students who are Greek maybe tend to be more likely to be involved in other activities on campus. In terms of Greek representation from DSG as a whole, I think it's actually, a great thing, I think, to be in Greek life, but to be a little bit critical of the system, which hopefully anyone in Greek life is, because we know that Greek life isn't perfect, like any systems on campus aren't perfect. Being able to understand Greek life really intimately means that you understand specific sexual assault problems that exist only in Greek life. You understand how to make the social culture more inclusive from the inside, right? You understand how housing through independent life versus affiliated life is different, and so you understand what to create in independent life to make it more similar to affiliated life, to create community. So I think that that's actually, is a better system. I live in an independent house, and so, I think I understand that perspective, at least somewhat, but that's why I think that being Greek isn't really necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you. John?
I think that my time here as Duke has given me a twofold understanding of both the independent student experience and the Greek life student experience. I joined Greek life during my sophomore year, and yet during my sophomore year I was vice president of Oz House Council, an independent house on West. I think that by serving as a leader in an independent community, I've garnered a great deal of understanding of what they need as a community in order to ensure that they have the best student experience possible. That includes increased funding for house council activities. It includes creating a greater sense of community with regards to house councils. It includes ensuring that not only Greek life are treated as exclusive organizations on campus that seemingly have preferential treatment, but ensuring that equal and fair treatment is acquired across the board. And I think that my experiences during my sophomore, freshman, and junior years best prepare me to do just that.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is for you, Annie. So you have no previous elected experience on campus. So how do you think that will impact your role if you're elected president?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question, and I think that even though I was never elected, that wasn't without trying, and I think I've still held myself accountable, and I hope that people have held me accountable as a leader. Another thing that, something where I had to be held really accountable for was being the chair of the Young Trustee Nominating Committee, and it's a very public role. People are going to come at you with a lot of criticisms, and I think that's something where I was able to be accountable to students, but also able to communicate the decisions that we made and why it was important and what we did. And so I think, being appointed versus the role that I am right now, being as a senator for academic affairs who was chosen at large, I don't think there's much difference between like an elected senator and an at-large senator. I still felt really accountable. I still feel like we need to work with communities on campus, and I don't think the fact that I haven't been elected by anybody yet has impacted that.
All right, so our last question is for you, Tara.
So in your platform, you say that you want to give students more voice in campus construction. However, that's also been a goal for a couple of years. And how will you make that happen? And do you think that a lot of this will be still relevant next year, given that a lot of major projects will be finished by the fall?
Yeah, so onto the first point of how we've had. On my committee, I've really tried to have students have more say on things. So for example, I created the curriculum focus group so students could actually talk to the curriculum committee and give feedback directly to them. I encouraged my senators who were working on whether they were working on ACES or registration or a German focus program to get more students in on those conversations. And we actually had meetings in the DSG office with lots of students about those issues, or Duke 101. So I think I have a track record of being effective at getting students into these rooms and into these conversations. And frankly, students want to talk about these issues. You just have to invite them to the table. So I think that I have experience experience doing that in the past, which is why I think that I'm the most effective person to do that in the future. I absolutely think that students should have more impact in these construction projects, right? There's a big, long window between now and the fall, and a lot of decisions are being made. So whether that's, should we add a pharmacy to the student health building, or should we add an IV station? Like, those are little things that admin might not be in support of, but students could be. I definitely think that construction is going to continue to happen. The West Union might not be done. There are new things we can add. I mean, I think it's always relevant to have students in on the conversation, and there's a lot of room to do so.
All right, so that's all of our formal questions. Now we're going to go to our lightning round. So really quick responses, less than 10 seconds each. So what's the best place to eat on campus? Tara, if you want to start.
I liked Grace's a lot, because that's gone. Anything that's not Panda Express, sorry.
All right, John?
I was going to say Panda Express.
Biggest class of the debate.
Annie, if you want to resolve.
Oh, law school, best one. Cheapest place on campus, best high paying.
All right, next question is, what is your best idea for spending DSG surplus money?
Nap buckets.
Oh my god. Makes extra free for everybody.
Renovate spaces for religious groups, including the Hindu Center and Muslim Center.
All right, and then who's your favorite professor?
John Burness.
Professor Michael Gillespie.
David Malone.
All right.
Ouch.
The
There's
next
a lot
one
of professors.
is, did you run for president of student government in high school, and did you win?
I was just telling John this last night. I did not, but I did. I was running for executive president and lost by like a couple votes.
I didn't run for president, probably would have lost if I did.
I ran for class president each and every year, lost my first year, got kicked out for an inappropriate speech my second year. I won my third year, and I became student government president my senior year.
Can we ask you inappropriate
All right, so
speeches?
next question. If you could take one class, pass-fail, what would it be?
Prisoner's dilemma.
This is the easiest question. Multi.
All right, and the last one, are you registered to vote, and if so, in North Carolina?
Yes and yes.
Yes, I'm a North Carolina resident.
No, apparently you can do same-day registration in the Freeman Center on registration day, so I figured I'd just do that on voting day. It's easy. If you like it, you did that.
So now we have closing statements.
And we'll actually do 30 seconds each before we run short on time. We'll start with you, Annie.
Yeah, so again, I think that I'm going to be the candidate who cares the most about working cohesively across the board with other groups. I'm really going to focus on making campus as open as it possibly be, opening up channels, using the leverage that the DSG president has as best as we can for the students. Continue that rhetoric of are we doing something that the students want, and I think we should continue to work on that as we're going through and not lose that vision.
Thank you. John?
From my perspective, Duke student government affecting change should not only be predicated on our institutional relationships and knowledge, but also on the vision we have. The vision I have for Duke University is one of inclusivity, one of fairness, equality, and justice for all students. I think I'm best prepared to do just that when it comes to student conduct, student health, sexual assault, campus energy efficiency, and academia charity.
Thank you. And finally, Tara.
Very simply, you need an effective president. You need someone who I think has a track record of results so that you know that they can follow through on the promises that we're all standing up here and making. I think you need to know that we've all had positions on exec and on DSG, and that you need the proof that you can actually accomplish what's being said. I think that, of course, you need to have a strong vision and a dynamic vision. You need to understand students on this campus and be able to translate that into concrete policy goals, whether that's in a campus form or in a website form or whatever it is, so that you know that policies are actually going to be enacted that shape your experience at Duke. I think effectiveness is key.
All right, thank you. So that's it. Thank you so much to everyone.
Great job.
Thank you guys.
What about questions?
The laptop is. We gotta sit down. Hey, would you be able to top that bag right there? No, I didn't.